Welcome to Truth Telling with Elizabeth D'Alto, the podcast dedicated to focusing on the truth that is always evolving within us and around us, where we explore the potentiality of truth as a highly esteemed value at a time in history when most people have more on their plates than any one human should. If you're new to me, full expression is my jam. Some words people have used to describe me range from speaker, trainer, coach, healer, writer, spiritual advisor, teacher, podcaster, and someone even called me their soul Sherpa once. I'm less concerned with titles or labels and more interested in results, change, and creating a world we want to, can, and are proud to live in. A kinder, gentler, more curious, collaborative, reverent world where people respect each other's backgrounds, experiences, and truths. They trust in themselves, in life, and recognize that we need each other. And they know how to cultivate healthy relationships to true power, not the very unhealthy kind of power our current culture is predicated upon. Speaking of our culture, there's a lot of noise and ignorance in our current culture, and this show aims to cut through that by exploring the truths of a diverse range of incredible voices. From authors, artists, creatives, and educators to activist speakers and those in various scientific and esoteric fields, our guests hail from cultures and countries all over the world. We post a new interview every Monday, and if you want to keep up with the show notes and quotes from our guests, you can follow me on Instagram at Elizabeth D'Alto. You can expect a wide range of topics when you tune into this show. Everything from health, communication, money, success, parenting, desire, sex, love, and spirituality, to making pivots and transitions in life, and topics related to psychology, storytelling, gender and race issues, emotional intelligence, activism, advocacy, and much more. A few disclaimers. No episode of the show is meant for everyone, and every episode is meant for whoever needs it on the right day at the right time. Not all guest views will reflect my own, and that's intentional. We don't learn, grow, heal, or improve by staying in our comfortable bubbles with all of our people who look, think, or live exactly how we do. If you love what you hear and find it useful and inspiring, the best way to show your appreciation is to share the episode, subscribe to the show, and leave us a rating and review wherever you listen in from. Thank you so much for being here with me. Here we go. This is episode number 271 of Truth Telling with Elizabeth D'Alto, and today Terri Cole is back on the podcast, and we are diving in on a topic this audience loves, and that is boundaries. We started out with how to know when you need them, and from there we got into high-functioning codependency, capacity versus willingness, overcorrections, and also misconceptions about what it means to be your best self. We also talked about how critical mindfulness and present moment consciousness are to well-drawn boundaries, cultivating the internal space to respond, not react, which is a really valuable distinction. And we also talked about boundary bullies and the relationship between boundaries and control. As always, Terri brings the good stuff, so if you're someone who is practicing better boundaries, this is definitely one to listen to a few times and share with friends. And also, don't forget to check out Terri's Boundary Bootcamp Challenge, which is happening from September 10th to September 14th, if you're listening here in real time in 2018, as well as her Boundaries Masterclass, which is coming up. Links to both of those things can be found in the show notes over at untameyourself.com/TT-271. Again, that's untameyourself.com/T as in truth, T as in telling -271. Terri Cole, I think you're our first three-peat. I think you are our first official 3-time guest on the podcast.
I'm the triple winner.
You come every year for us. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome.
So we have talked about, in 2015, we talked about dealing with the big hot emotions. In 2017, maybe it was, either way, the year doesn't matter. We talked about real love. Today, we're diving in on something we are both so passionate about, which is boundaries.
I love it.
I love it so much. It makes me want to talk sing. I will try to spare all of you as little of that during the episode as possible. So the first question, what is a truth that's having a big impact on your life right now?
That we don't live forever.
Ooh. Why is that the thing?
Well, part of it is that the aging process is one that you can't ignore. My husband is 10 years older than me. He's not old. He's perfectly fine. Nothing's wrong with him. But I find that mortality his mortality, maybe even more than my own, is sort of way closer to the front of my mind.
Mm.
And it makes everything sweeter. And I'm so much more present and so much less bitchy, because you're like, dude, if he was abducted by aliens tomorrow, so to speak, right? Like, how would you feel about the idiot that you're being now? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just sweet. It's really made me be really, really grateful that there's truth in that, and that there's a reason why. Being dialed into the cycle of life, going from, listen, anyone who's aged past the age of 30, we have the beginning of this process of where I don't even think I noticed a change in my looks or my body or whatever until I was way past 30, way past. I felt like I was never going to change. I think it was into my 40s before I started to notice physical changes. And I was like, well, now you have decisions to make. How will you do this? Will you do it? And with no judgment. Like, I've just got super curious about what was it going to be for me? Because I think it's really easy for people who haven't been in this situation to be like, I would never, and I would always, and I'm the kind of person. Oh, you know what,
Yeah.
motherfucker? Until you actually get there, you have no idea what kind of person you are. Trust me.
Yeah.
So it's looking at what does it look like to do this well, and to be in not just acceptance, but to be in celebration of where I am in my life cycle.
I love that so much. And as my parents, when they crossed over into their 60s, that's when I started to consider this as well. You know, and even in the past month, they both had like kind of big deal health things, and I was like, oh, like for like my mom had to go into for a procedure. My dad had like blood clots on his legs, and he had to do something, and I was like, wow, this could be it.
Mm-hmm.
And in another context, I recently, I had met this guy a couple months ago. It was like super hot and intense at the beginning and then like faded off. And I thought we were done. I thought I would never see this person again.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that was most upsetting to me was that the last time I saw him, I totally took for granted that I would be seeing him again soon. And I wished that I would have known, because I would have just like hugged him and like kissed him and like taken him in, you know? And so we reconnected, and I saw him 2 more times before I decided to like not see him anymore for good.
Right.
And both of those times I treated it like it was going to be the last time I ever saw him again. And it was sweet. And I told him that too. I'm like, you know what? I don't know if you noticed this, but I like hugged you harder, like paused, like kind of embedded you in my memory and like kissed you extra hard before you left. Cause I never, like the last time I saw you, I didn't know it was going to be 3 months till I see you again. So I was sharing that with someone. They were like, yeah, you know, like, why don't we just do that all the time? Because we never know anyway. But it's weird that it takes something big like that, usually, or like an event to trigger. Maybe I should pay closer attention.
You know, it's funny. I've had two experiences in my life that sort of prematurely threw me into that. Well, one was my father dying suddenly when he was only 61, and I was in my early 30s. And so that was one where it's just such a punch in the face where you're like, oh my God, anyone could die at any moment. Not to be paranoid, but I definitely, went into this whole experience of being so afraid my mother was going to pass young as well, flipping out if I didn't hear from Vic, which I'm so normally not like that.
Yeah.
But I remember I had some weird experience at the gym. We would always meet. We were still living in Jersey at the time. We would always meet at this place after we worked out. So in the gym, it was like this corner of the gym before we walked out together, but it wasn't there. So I said to the person at the front desk, can you page my husband, which I would also normally not do. This is like 3 weeks after my father dropped dead suddenly. And so she pages him. I'm standing there. He's not coming. Now I'm starting to lose my mind. Like, I'm getting so scared. Maybe something happened. And now my father died suddenly of a massive coronary. So then I go up to the front desk again, and I'm like, I need you to get someone to go into the bathroom. What if he's going to the bathroom and like had a massive coronary and needs help? What if he needs CPR right now? What if, people could just die? Like, sometimes they just die. It happens. It just happened to my father. Like, just this poor girl was like, hey, no worries, I'll get someone to go in. And then Vic, who never gets mad at anything, is he's the most mellow Pisces ever, came out. He was like, you had me paged? You had someone sitting in together? What is going on? And I was like, He was like, okay. No, I'm not mad. Not a problem. Let's go outside. But anyway, so that was my reaction to that. And the other example is before Vic was embedded in Afghanistan. So he was being embedded as an artist. He's like a visual artist, as you know, with a medevac unit in a very, as front as you could be, as the hottest part of the war is basically where he was going. I was like, oh, sounds great. And the night before, now I'm not stopping him, right? Because I don't own him. We are partners. I love him. This is like a lifelong dream of his to do this. Who am I to say he shouldn't do it? And maybe if we had infants or little kids, maybe I would feel differently. But I really am clear about, I didn't want to be the one, and I couldn't be the one to say, don't do it because I'm scared. Like, that's just so wrong. Although the boys were like, how could you let dad go to Afghanistan? What if he gets his right arm blown off? What's he going to do for work? One of the kids asked that. I was like, okay, Alex, I don't know. I'm not thinking about him getting his right arm blown off. But the night before, we were in the city apartment, and we were laying in bed, and he actually fell asleep, and I didn't sleep 1 minute. I was just, crap, I think I'm going to cry.
It's okay. I kind of want to cry too. We do it sometimes.
All right, so we'll just cry together. But I was laying behind him, and I had my arms like around him, and I was spooning him while he was sleeping. And I was thinking, like, wow, this has been the best. Like, he's the best. Wow, I hope this isn't the last time we do this. Yeah. Like, it was that part of me that I couldn't stop crying. I was so torn between being so grateful that I had it for a minute.
Yeah.
And so scared he wasn't going to come back. And it was so excruciating, and like, it was still bittersweet, beautiful. I mean, of course, I drop him off the next day. I'm like, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. And, I was like, I'm not waiting with him in that area for the whole time. I just can't do it.
Yeah.
And as soon as I left where he couldn't see me anymore, I went down these stairs, and I just went against the wall and just slid down the wall and just sat there for like 20 minutes.
Oh my God.
Like, please. Anyway, back to the point of, what is the thing that's been on my mind is that the impermanence of this life, and how can that inform the way that we live? Just as you shared sort of with your story, you would have done it differently.
Yeah.
And it's not about living in a heightened state of fear. It's about living in a heightened state of gratitude, present moment consciousness.
Yeah. And not taking like little tiny things for granted. Are you familiar with Jason Silva's work? You ever watch any of his videos and stuff?
No, I don't think so.
I'm not up on his current stuff, but many years ago when he started this YouTube channel called Shots of Awe, one of the videos, it's only like 2.5 minutes, but it's called Existential Bummer. And he talks about how part of being in love is this implicit sadness because you know it's not going to be forever. It's like the minute you have it, you know that it also has to end at some point for whatever reason. It's kind of like the paradox. So, I like that little tender note we started on, but I really want to dive in so we can spend some good time on boundaries because it's such an important thing. There's so much to it. So I guess where I want to start is, how might someone know that they need some friggin' boundaries?
Oh, that's a great question. If you feel frustrated a lot, misunderstood a lot, annoyed, and I'm going to put quotes around that because most of the time women in particular say annoyed when they mean like filled with homicidal rage, right? We misname shit all the time. You know what I mean? I was so annoyed.
We try to minimize it. I was so annoyed. Yeah. I wanted to rip someone's face off.
Right. You're like, was that annoyed? If you feel wronged, if you feel victimized, if you are not living a life where you are getting your needs met or that you're meeting your own needs, right? If you feel like you're constantly putting other people's needs, wants, and desires above your own, and yet you're left feeling like pissed or unimportant or marginalized in some way. Is that enough reasons?
Yeah. And I want to hone in on that last one that you said, because I think as women, we are largely cultured and conditioned that nourishing people, taking care of people, that's where a lot of our value comes from. And as well, in this particular wave or between waves of modern feminism is the like, I don't need anyone. I could do this myself, which I think there's a line between being independent and being like over functioning and unavailable and not receptive. Because like someone was telling me recently that Esther Perel has been talking about how like the tribe is gone or something, the village at the end of the village. And it's true. Like, I think, and I've certainly had this experience of being like too independent and not having space for people to show up for me and help me. And that's something I'm always working on. But so how do people distinguish? Because it'll be a different balance for everyone, right? Like, how do they really know the difference between I'm over functioning, I'm trying to do everything myself and for everybody else, and this is an appropriate level of wanting to like help people because I can and be generous?
Well, I can say that most of the women in my crew, most of the people who are really drawn to my work are what I've coined a phrase of high functioning codependency.
Yeah.
So if you think about that, and you and I think talked about this on the last show, but most of there are women who are my demo are women who are very successful, like they know how to negotiate systems, they're getting stuff done in the world and in their lives. They are good friends and good daughters and good partners and good sisters and all they're, good, citizens, right? They're doing all of these things, but they really are doing it at the expense of themselves.
Yeah.
And so part of it is the drive to be all things to all people, the inability to say no to something else so you can say yes to yourself, to resting, to restoring, to what you want, saying, prioritizing your preference, right? We're not even talking about this being like the end of the world, but or like some horrible confrontation that needs to happen, right? I'm literally talking about knowing your preference. So finding that space that you're talking about, back to your question, which was, how do we find the balance between being good daughters, good friends, good human beings, right, in the world, or feeling that way, and being a good advocate for ourselves? And there's a place in the middle. Most of the women who are drawn to my work, they are their capacity to work, they're so capable, they're so efficient and very smart. But they're the intellectualizers because they have all the answers. And the answer is never to take a break and take care of themselves. And the answer is never to say no simply because you just don't effing want to do that thing. They feel like they need a reason. They must justify. They must give context. And that's really not true. And the real thing that I find with these high functioning women is that there's this misconception about what it means to be your best self. Your best self is not overgiving all day, every day. Your best self is being discerning.
Yeah.
Is choosing mindfully, is knowing yourself well enough to be able to say no with ease and grace. Knowing yourself well enough to be able to allow other people to help you, accepting help, surrendering to what is. And these are all things that in my 20s, I would have considered like a bad word or an insult in some way. It would have, to me at that age, it would have looked like I was, putting up the white flag, you know what I mean? Like I was giving up in some way. Surrender at my age now, and with all the things that I've learned and what I teach, really is more about surrendering to what is, like what is real, what is happening. So easy example is surrendering. If you're in traffic, you live in LA, you're on the 405, the 5, the 110, whatever the hell you're on. I mean, I have friends who talk about this all the time. Like, well, I sat in traffic 38 hours last week. Well, first of all, stop keeping track of how long you're sitting in traffic. Quit your job in the entertainment business if they continue to shoot in Long Beach, right? Just that's a choice you can make. Move out of the valley. I don't know. There's many things that you can do, or you can surrender to what is, if that's what you're doing, and then make mindful choices about that time in the car Don't expect not to be in traffic if you're driving in drive time traffic and you live in LA.
Yeah.
You're going to sit in traffic, but you could learn a new language or call the people who you haven't seen on your hands-free device or whatever. So again, that's also a boundary issue, right? There's a reality that you are living in non-reality, right? Doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. Didn't Einstein say that's the definition of insanity?
Yeah.
Well, it is. So back to the boundaries. What were you going to say?
So this is a great point, and this is something that I talk about with my women in my programs as well, which is that often when we hear boundaries, we always think, oh, I need to have boundaries with other people, but we need to have boundaries with ourselves too, which is basically what you just described.
Okay. Yes, boundaries with yourself. And an easy way to see if you do or don't have boundaries with yourself is A, do you keep your word to yourself?
Mm-hmm.
How often do you break your word to yourself to basically appease someone else, to do something for someone else? So you say you're going to go to the gym, but then your mother needs something, so you don't go to the gym, right? That's a bad internal boundary because you're not keeping your word to yourself. But there's other internal boundaries, which we also call them sort of emotional or mental or psychological boundaries, where if you feel compelled to confess your whole life to someone on the first date, if you almost feel like you have to be like, do I need to tell them that thing happened to me, or that I got a divorce, or whatever it is, this need to just say it all is also an indication of a bad emotional boundary. Because healthy emotional boundaries mean that people get to know each other over time.
Yes.
And that you make a mindful decision whether that person is proving to be trustworthy enough.
Yeah.
That you want to trust them with your tender information, whatever it may be.
Totally. This is a really important point that I have bumped into myself when I started dating a couple months ago, because I was coming from a place of, I find sometimes if you're coming fresh out of some kind of like deep healing or like process or whatever, and many people listening know that I'd come out of an emotionally abusive relationship. My former partner was super narcissistic. It was just like, it was a lot. I had my own codependency. Like there was a lot to unpack. And so as I was going back into dating, I was super freaking clear about the things that I was never going to do again. And I think sometimes this is where like boundaries become barriers.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm just going to lay it all out. And if they can't handle it, they're not. And it's like, well, no, like exactly what you just said. Like, I don't need to go like full blast with people on like dates 1 to 3 as a way to like vet someone, because that's not, people get to earn access to that. So if someone is, like you're saying, proving trustworthy, it's seeming like a good connection, then at some point, and I think this is a difference. You and I were having a separate conversation earlier about truth-telling and trust and withholding and sharing, and there's a lot of boundary stuff around this.
Yes, there really is. And I think that what you're describing, when we come out of a situation that was very painful and we do the overcorrection, and it's the same thing. If you haven't drawn boundaries, if you haven't known how to negotiate for your needs or how to say no, a lot of times in the beginning, at least how it was for me in my 20s, it would be like I would use an andiron when basically like a feather would have done. Right? So I would be like, no, I'm not doing that because I don't want to and I don't have to, you know?
Yeah.
Person's like,
a simple no would have been just fine.
True story. You don't have to. I don't know who said you did, but it was almost like there was so much fear of doing it.
Yeah.
And I felt like if I didn't do it really strong, then nobody was going to respect it. And of course, you get into the nuances. The more you do it, the easier it gets. And the more you realize that, shockingly, most people will respect a well-drawn boundary.
Yeah.
But here's the catch. You have to draw it.
Yeah.
They can't read your mind, you know?
Well, and you just said a well-drawn boundary. So what is the difference between what are the qualities of a well-drawn boundary versus one that is not?
Well, let's talk about the ones that are not first.
Okay.
So we have all these ways that, like, imagine that our need, right, to draw boundaries, this is like our feelings. And what is, we've talked, I think about this before, that, Freud has this whole thing. He talks about human beings being like potbelly stoves, and our feelings are like the smoke. So when we try to be indirect with the smoke, by, let's say you would stuff a bunch of paper down the flue of a potbelly stove, would that make the smoke disappear? Oh, no. So it's the same thing with feelings. So when we can't be direct and have a well-drawn boundary by speaking truthfully, using I statements, not doing it in a crazy heated moment to the best of your ability. Sometimes that's unavoidable, but I feel like most of the times it is avoidable. Yeah. We'll talk about how it's avoidable later. There's a way to do it, right? If you're too afraid to do it, or no one taught you how to do it, or you think that doing it means you have to have a terrible confrontation, or you're going to lose people, or whatever it is that your fear is, that smoke still needs to come out. Your feelings are still going to come out, but now they're going to come out sideways.
Yeah.
So no one is going to know what the hell is going on. Now you lose the impact, but you certainly create conflict. So how do they come out sideways? A poorly drawn boundary, or let's say a dysfunctionally drawn boundary, is one that you try to draw with indirect communication. Mm-hmm. So that could be the eye roll, a heavy sigh. That could be the passive-aggressive smiley after you say something douchey in a text, where you're like, right, we're good, cool, bye. Like, where you're not being truthful, but you're being sarcastic or snide, rather than owning what is your truth. The reason people are afraid to draw boundaries is, one, no one ever teaches you how. Why I became an expert on teaching people, because so many people needed it, but also because there's fear. There's fear of what? Well, it makes us vulnerable. There's a certain amount of vulnerability required to draw a boundary and tell the truth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, because there's risk involved, right? And as you were saying that, the passive aggressive thing, I was remembering an instance where I did it and where someone else did it to me, where I was coming back from a trip. I had plans with a friend. Actually, I didn't. A friend and I were like, let's see each other when you get back this week, mm-hmm. right? And so I was like at the airport, like, hey, I'm on my way home. What looks good for you this week? And the friend was like, well, and it was like this drawn out, like, well, like, like this, and this. And it was like, okay, so they actually weren't going to be able to do what we thought we were going to be able to do. And they had said, like, I didn't want you to be upset, which is why I was being all ginger about it. And I'm like, what you don't understand is I'm more upset that you were ginger about it and you weren't like, I'm so sorry. I thought I was going to be able to do this and I'm not going to. It's the direct communication that would have felt so much better versus what you were saying is like the like trying to be all cutesy and like step around my feelings and think that you were being kind when really what you were being is treating me like I wasn't going to be able to handle it, which sucks to receive.
It's also so much projection. I get so pissed if people do that. At this point in my life, I get so pissed. Or if someone says to me, I can't explain it, I have a terrible reaction when someone says, I feel so bad that I feel so bad. I'm all like, hey, listen, I'm sure there's 1,000,005 other things that you should feel guilty about in your life. Stop using me to beat yourself in the face with, because it pisses me off. Yeah. Either keep your word or just own it. I agree with you. It's like, why are you treating me like I'm a sophomore in high school? Because I'm not. Yeah. I can handle your directness. Please bring it on. It's the weirdness that I don't know what that means. Why are you saying on a text? I have no idea. Are you okay? Are you like, just say what it is. Right?
Yeah. And then from being on the other side of it, I notice when I feel any kind of urge to do that myself, it's usually with someone who I know, who I just know, I'm not assuming, is likely not going to have a great response to it. And I'm trying to save myself from having to deal with their response.
Yeah, totally. Agreed.
Quick break in the show, everybody, to invite you to an online life class that I'm running this week on Thursday, September 13th. If you're listening here in real time in 2018, it'll be happening at 4:30 Pacific time, and the recording will be available for 72 hours afterwards for anyone who can't make it live. The link with all the information is wildsoulmovement.com/life class. And here's what we'll be covering. It is the Unconsume Yourself time of year. Some of you are familiar with this training. I run it every year. This will be my third year, and I'm bumping it up this year so it's not conflicting with the holiday season, but rather preparing you for the holiday season. The life class is called Living Powerfully with Courage and Truth, and it is one part life class, one part celebration of deeper, truer living. What we're going to be covering is how and why we become overconsumed to begin with, because when you understand the root of an issue, it's much easier to resolve. We'll talk about why living powerfully with courage and truth is important and what it could look like for you, because we're all different and we'll all express and embody these things uniquely. And I'll also walk you through the core concepts from my Unconsume Yourself training, which is essentially how to detox your life physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and energetically. So if that sounds interesting to you, again, this is a free life class. I don't really do free online classes much anymore, but I'm doing this one because Friday is my birthday and I like to give away free stuff around my birthday. So again, the link to join that is wildsoulmovement.com/life class. Even if you can't make it live, as I mentioned, the recording will be available for 72 hours, so you could check it out over the weekend. All right, everyone, I hope to see you there, and back to the show. So I want to come back to what you said earlier. How do we avoid setting a boundary in a heated moment? What does that take?
Well, I think that there has to, the whole thing with present moment consciousness and the whole thing with, why I make anyone who gets involved with me professionally, create some kind of a meditation practice is because we can only live mindfully and draw mindful boundaries if there's enough internal space for us to respond and not react.
Yeah.
Because if we're reacting, usually there's some defensive element to this process. And, one of my heroes, Dr. Harriet Lerner, she says, defensiveness is the arch enemy of listening.
Oh, that is a good one.
Oh, yeah. It's the arch enemy of really knowing people. You're blocking that ability to intimately know people. And so dealing with our own defensiveness and being able to sort of get past our own defensiveness requires a minute, because if you don't have some space inside, I'm sure there's other things that create space. The only one I know that actually worked for me is having a dedicated meditation practice that I've had for 18 years. Before that, I was very reactionary. Yeah. I was very always verbally punching someone in the face and then having to be sorry about that later. And hey, man, I'm not saying you might not still choose to punch someone in the face, because sometimes we just got to punch a bitch. Sometimes you just need to punch somebody. But it'll be a choice.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It'll
Mindful
be a
choice.
And not something that you're just reacting from. So to not do it in the heat of the moment means that you have some space internally. And if it gets heated, it's okay to say, hey, I need a break. I do want to talk about this. I think it's important, but I want to just breathe and walk around the block, or I want to take a minute, because I don't want to be having this conversation when we're both so hot.
Yep.
I feel like it'll be way more productive and kind if we're just a little cooler.
Yeah.
And that's it. Buy time. And also, we train people, yep. Right? I'm the director and the star of my life. So you don't get to tell me when we have to have this conversation. Hey, you can make a request. But if I'm requesting that we stick a pin in it for 30 minutes, I will hope that you'll be able to acquiesce to that, consider that, or whatever it is.
And what you're saying here, which I think is important, is you're not saying to someone, I need a week. Because that's also, for some people, that could be torture. Whatever is the context in which people know themselves. I'm going to reference here the Myers-Briggs system. I'm an ENFJ, and the primary thing that drives my life is harmony in relationships. So if there's something hot on the table with someone that needs to be addressed, and they're going to say to me, hey, could we talk about this next week? I'm going to say, how about I give you 2 days? which knowing that those 2 days are going to be really challenging for me. But if you need space, I'm willing to give you space. But I'm not willing to give it a week that I will want to shoot myself by the time the conversation comes around, you know?
Yes, I think, Elizabeth, you make a really good point, which is, we have to meet in the middle, right? So if I need a minute or 30 minutes, I feel like that's super reasonable.
Yeah.
I think someone needing 7 days is avoiding what needs to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe you need 2 hours. Maybe you can say, hey, can we visit this when we get home from work tonight, or revisit it or whatever.
Yeah.
That's not the same as saying, can we revisit it next May? Right. It's like keeping someone hostage, or you feel like you're in some state of purgatory where you don't understand what's going on. It doesn't feel good.
And that's the word I've often used for those types of things. Like it is kind of a hostage situation. However, I'm remembering now as I'm saying this, back in the day, I totally did this to my mom many years ago when she said something that at the time it just hit on something that I hadn't done my work around. And I needed to not talk to her indefinitely. And I know that was torture for her, but that was also, there was something at that time. So this is why there's nuance and complexity, which is something people on the show hear me say all the time. Every situation is different. And for me at that time, which now I understand, I was breaking a long standing codependency dance that we had going on. Right. I had to do that. And I knew it would be really hard for her. But at that time, that was like the thing. It was like I needed to swing that far in order to be able to come back to a place that could be healthy on a consistent basis, because I'd never done it before. Yeah.
And I think that when we're talking about family of origin stuff and original injuries, which is what you're talking about, that a lot of times that requires a different way of it being handled, because those are such ingrained behavioral dynamics in relationships that sometimes it takes sort of torching the village-ish to rebuild a better village,
Yeah, yeah. So part of why we're having this conversation now is because you have a couple of things coming up that you're teaching around boundaries. You have a challenge, you have a masterclass, and then you actually have a course. And I want to talk about origin in a different context, which is last year, the Boundary Bootcamp course wasn't even a thing until you ran Real Love Revolution. So what went down? What did you notice as you were training people in healthier love that necessitated creating a whole entire course around boundaries?
Well, exactly what that sounds like is what happened. I got to week 8, and it was supposed to be like the boundary and the language conversation. And I jam-packed it so much, it was overflowing, like ridiculous. Nobody could do it in a week or 4 weeks probably.
Yeah.
And I just was like, this has to be its own 8-week course.
Yeah.
This is so important. And it was universal that every person and now I've run Real Love Revolution twice, right? So that's, I don't know, however many 1,000 women, whatever it is, that there wasn't one person that was like, oh yeah, my boundary skills are rock solid.
Yeah.
Everyone was like, I need more. I need language, which inspired me to create the Boundary Bible, which is a part of Boundary Bootcamp, the course itself, which is basically everything in one place.
Yeah.
So if you're in this situation, there's language for because so many of the women who are in my tribe are so super coachable, super smart, brave. The missing piece was understanding why it was so hard, right? So we do the historical stuff, but the real key was they just simply didn't have the words.
Yeah, yeah.
Actually just didn't have the words. And so in providing, like you said, the nuanced languaging around, well, how would you do it if it were your boss as opposed to your boyfriend, as opposed to your sister?
Yeah.
There's different relationships that require different types of boundaries. They all require boundaries, right? And if you don't have any in any of them, like exactly what relationship your boundaries are being trampled on, and perhaps where you have a boundary bully in your life, because for many women it's hard to draw the boundary, but if somebody pushes back, even for a moment, they're like, okay. And it's so hard to stand your ground. And another thing that you learn, and I've learned, is that we're so afraid to do it that we learn how to do it. We're like, okay, I'm going to totally confront my boss or the person I work with, or my boyfriend, whoever I'm confronting. And then you do it once. And then a week later, the person comes back to the course and is like, you're not going to believe it. He texted me over the weekend again, my boss. And I'm like, yeah, you're going to have to draw that boundary more than one time.
Yeah.
Like, it's this, especially with someone who's a repeat boundary offender, as I like to call them. You don't think that just by saying it. Now you have to say it, right? Because that's your job, is to speak the boundary and to. We also talk a lot about body language and how we want our body language to be aligned with what we're saying, right? So if we're like, I don't want to do this, whatever it is, but your body language is super open and you're leaning in, you're giving conflicting messages. If you don't want to do something, you'd be more closed. You'd be like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
You would turn your body away. And being aware of that is very helpful when you're trying to draw boundaries. But know this about boundaries. Anybody listening who feels like they are a boundary disaster rather than a master, is that all of the stuff that you learned, the bad habits, let's say, or the misinformation that you were given in your own boundary blueprint, can be unlearned. So none of this, regardless of what your personality is, you could be an introvert and you can still learn how to draw boundaries with ease and grace. You can be an extrovert, whatever it is in your life. You can be an empath and you can still do it. So fear not. We are doing a really, it's called Big Beautiful Boundary Challenge. It's completely free. Super fun. Elizabeth will share her link with you guys. It's the 10th through the 14th of September, moving into Big Beautiful Boundary Masterclass, where I'm going to be tying it all together so you can gain clarity on your own sort of where are your real deficits.
Yeah.
When it comes to drawing boundaries.
And what I love about this, again, the complexity and the nuance, I love that you're addressing the different types of relationships, because a conversation with this person in this area of your life might not be the same as this person in this area. And we all, like, some things will be more tender, some things will be harder. Our historical relationship with certain types of people and our dynamic will totally determine whether it's easy. And something that, you were saying, you might have to set this boundary more than once. A conversation that I've had in a lot of my programs with people is you can set a boundary, but then you also have to be willing to enforce the boundary.
That's exactly right.
And enforcing a boundary means that when someone crosses it or pushes it, there needs to be a consequence then.
Yes. Let's talk about consequences, shall we?
Yeah.
Because people will say, well, what do I do if I draw the boundary and someone keeps stepping over it? This is the exact conversation that has to happen there. You have to you have to create appropriate consequences for someone pushing that limit, stepping over that line that you've drawn. A lot of times there's confusion about what that is. So let's just give it a really simple example. If you have a friend who is always late, so I'm always on time, and if one of my sisters actually used to always be late, and I'm very close to her, but it would make me insane, like crazy. So listen, I was young and unhealthy too. So, I'm not saying it's right to be insane, but it was a real pet peeve. I couldn't accept that in her, right? So we would fight, she would come to dinner, and then I'd be pissed for the first hour. I'd be barely talking, be withdrawn in anger, just doing the whole bullshit dance, just wasting my life. But, again, that's where the smoke or the feelings is coming out every nook and cranny of that potbelly stove instead of coming out the flue. Had I had the skills then to just directly deal, it wouldn't have happened that way. We would have been over it. Maybe she would have been defensive for a minute or whatever.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have dominated 2 hours of our dinner or an hour and a half of our dinner, which would happen relatively frequently until I got healthier. So what do you do? What is the consequence? I then drew the boundary with her and said, hey, I have to tell you, please let me know if you're going to be more than 10 minutes late. And if you're more than 20 minutes late, I'm leaving the restaurant. I can't. It's just too painful. You know how I feel about it. That's it. And so she started telling me if she was going to be late. And then there was one time when she was more than 20 minutes late. I hadn't heard from her. And even though I was worried about her, I left the restaurant, went home. And that never happened again after that. And she got in touch with me. I'm really sorry. My phone died. I was like, okay, well, great. But that makes me not even want to make dinner plans with you. I'm glad you're okay. But the consequence for her was enough to really impact the behavior. I wasn't doing it to punish her. I was doing it because I needed her to see that she was hurting me. It was hurting my feelings.
Yeah.
It was making me feel unimportant. It was making me mad that I jumped in a $15 cab to get there on time.
Yeah.
And she felt fine to take the subway and be 20 minutes late. It just, now you may or may not be able to come to an agreement with someone like that, but the consequences become more severe depending on the situation and depending on how often the boundary violation is repeated. So I have different strategies and techniques that I teach within the course about if it is a repeat boundary offender, what do you do? With a boundary bully, you have to establish that you have drawn the boundary for the first time. Like so many women, especially in my crew, will say, listen, that's like ridiculous. He knows. Any normal person would know that what he did is messed up.
No.
He knows. Exactly.
They don't know.
And here's the thing. Even if they do know, you are not exempt from speaking up for yourself, because therein lies your healing.
Yes.
Therein lies your confidence building. Therein lies all the good stuff for you. So let's stop making the other guy wrong, the other person wrong, even if they are, and start making it right by telling the truth about what that would look like. So yes, do things get, especially if you're, and listen, you guys, I do a whole separate thing about, I have this whole area of the course where it's boundaries and addicts, boundaries and exes, boundaries and mother-in-laws, boundaries and work people. Like I did separate these bonus sort of videos with PDFs with it for very specific areas. Boundaries if you're sick, like people with chronic illness and how people are so annoying and don't know how to be, you know?
Yeah.
Because the nuances are important. The way that you draw a boundary with your best friend will certainly be different than the way that you do it with your boss, right? It depends on, do we have equal power?
Yes.
You know, work is a very specific boundary situation that you got to deal with, whether it's subordinates or superiors. Friendship is very specific. Mm-hmm. Family stuff, family of origin stuff. We do a whole thing and you've got to break down, like, why are you the way you are when it comes to boundaries? Yeah. So if you have the disease to please, did your mother have that? You know, are you a second or third generation disease to pleaser? I don't know. But that's something that, how ingrained it is in your unconscious mind has everything to do with the way that you were raised. So much of what I'm doing in the challenge and in the master courses is helping the participants be discerning and raise their awareness, because all of this stuff that is in your unconscious mind, how can you possibly change it if you're not consciously aware of it? You're consciously aware that you're in pain, that you're frustrated, that you're angry all the time, that you've got a low-grade pissed off feeling 89% of the time. Mm-hmm. But if you don't know why, you can blame it on PMS, you can blame it on whatever you want. But the truth is, so much of the time when you feel that constriction, when you feel angry, a boundary needs to be drawn. A need is not being met. Yeah. And that is your physical tell that something is happening for you that needs your attention.
Yeah. I'm really curious of your opinion on the relationship between boundaries and control. So, and I'll give context for this. I want to read you, I looked up, there's this hilarious meme that someone sent me this morning that says, when you set firm boundaries and call someone out on their bullshit, and they immediately accuse you of being an arrogant, self-centered individual who isn't operating from a place of love. It's like, I find some of the biggest boundary bullies in my life have been the people who want to say, you're not being compassionate, or you're not considering my feelings. And they want to just make it about them and totally dishonor or accuse you of like, well, you just need to control everything. So it's, I guess the broader question is the relationship between boundaries and control, but then also the type of shit that people are going to, the boundary bully things that people are going to say to you and throw back at you that will make you second guess the boundary. So two separate things, take them in whatever order you want.
Well, let's talk about the things that people say or the things we say to ourselves that create, I call it a boundary hangover, right? Is like the things we say to ourselves. I think I'm being selfish. I'm afraid they're going to think I'm a bitch. I am being self-centered right now. People will throw things back at you. After all I've done for you, I can't believe you're not going to do this for me.
Like you owe them.
Yeah. What else? I don't think it's asking a lot after everything I've done. I can't believe that you're not willing to like listen to me talk shit about blah 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 or whatever after everything that I've listened to from you.
Yeah.
So throwing your relationship back in, even though it's not the same, and you know it's not the same, you're like, right, I'm not talking shit about anyone, I'm just talking about myself, and you're calling me to triangulate and gossip. They're different things, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm drawing a boundary, and they might be angry about that. So those are the things that, and I call them the lies we tell ourselves, right? So that we don't have to draw boundaries. So we make up excuses for other people. Oh, I know it's the fourth quarter and he's always stressed in the fourth quarter, so that's why he blew up at me. I understand. Or I know she's PMSing. She didn't really mean it. It's not a big deal. So we make excuses for people. And the secondary gain for that is not having to draw the boundary, speak authentically, right? The secondary gain is we get to stay in that comfortable homeostasis, that equilibrium of everything being the same. But sooner or later, we end up angry, martyred, victimized, bitter, which you don't want.
Right.
So the other thing about how do we know the difference between control and boundaries? Well,
hang on. Sorry, I'm going to cut you off for a second to just in case anyone listening does not know what you mean by secondary gain. Can you give a brief definition for that?
Secondary gain is, and if you look on my YouTube channel, I've got a lot of stuff about this, but secondary gain is basically what do you get to not feel, not experience, or not face by staying stuck.
Yeah.
So if we make excuses for other people, like she's PMSing, that's why she's being mean, then what we get to not feel, not face, not handle is confronting her about the fact that her screaming at you hurt your feelings and you making a simple request that she stop doing that.
Yeah.
Well, that might blow up into a big confrontation. That might have that person reject you. If you've always been the all-accepting Mama Earth, nothing ever bothers you person, and now you suddenly say it does, you might be afraid of rejection or getting excommunicated from the tribe. So we have a lot of unconscious and conscious fears around what drawing boundaries how it'll be perceived by others and what it means to us.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so let's get into the last topic about the difference between boundaries and control.
Yeah.
It's super simple. When it comes to your life, you can make any request that you want of people. It's your boundary to draw. If you're drawing a boundary about another person that has to do with something else in their life, that isn't drawing a boundary. That's judging them. That's giving them unasked for advice or criticism. That's giving them your truth that they perhaps didn't ask for, right? So you know the difference. If someone says, can you give me an example of the person who's like, you just want to control everything? Like, did you have one in mind? You're not being
a passive aggressive, just, you make a request of someone that's a boundary and they say something passive aggressive like, well, I know how you like to control everything. Or, oh, I know how you like to be in control. And you're like, I just actually want to have a better experience here. Yep.
But if someone says that, I would straight up head on say, there was this hostile energy in that comment. And I really want to know.
Yeah.
What is it that about me taking care of myself that is making you mad? Because I'm not making you wrong. I'm really not. I'm just making a simple request that would have me have a better experience. And if you can't do that, or not willing to do that, don't want to do that, say so. We can have a debate. We can have a conversation. We can have a negotiation. That's what relationships are about. But you making an offhanded kind of snide comment, it's not only not helpful, but it's hurtful. So I want to know why you're feeling hostile enough that you want to kind of hurt my feelings.
Yeah. Thank you. So anything I haven't asked you about boundaries? I mean, I know, again, people, we we dove in and we talked about so many aspects of boundaries, why have them, when they don't work, why they don't work, boundary bullies. And Terri has a lot of resources coming up for you. Again, the Masterclass, the challenge, and then the actual course itself. So there's plenty more for you to learn here if this is something that's up for you. But is there anything I didn't ask you here, Terri, that you feel like you want to share before we wrap up?
The last thing I would say about boundaries is that it is the one skill set that nobody really teaches us. And yet it is also that same skill set that can create this false ceiling in our level of happiness, satisfaction, and career success. It really is that crucial to become fluent in the language of your own boundaries. And if you don't, you are leaving up that glass ceiling of your own making. In my estimation, and 20 years of working with very successful women in the world, I really feel like this is the one thing that is, if it's missing, you really will have a cap on how successful and or happy you will be in your life.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much. So listen, y'all, anyone who wants to get to Terri's stuff, the easiest way is go to my Instagram. A lot of you probably follow me on Instagram anyway. And you know I keep that one little handy link in my Instagram profile. It'll have links to all of Terri's stuff there. So just go over to my @ElizabethD'Alto Instagram, and I'll put all my links. Because the other thing is this. Anyone who actually takes Terri's course, I'm going to make a special Wild Soul Movement video for you. I've done this before for Terri's people, because this kind of work, it's deep and it's energetic and it's emotional. And since a lot of the people that pull towards it, like Terri was saying, are those over-functioning people, which, Terri has helped me personally not be so over-functioning anymore. The embodiment, to be able to actually like release this stuff through your body, is very helpful and very complimentary. And from my women who went through Real Love Revolution last year, they loved the Wild Soul Movement videos. That
Amazing.
I made 3 for that course because that was super intense. So I'm going to make 1 for the Boundary Bootcamp people. So you do want to make sure you use my link for that, so I know to send you that video if you heard Terri on the podcast and that's how you found out about it. So thank you, as always, so much, friends. We could go on forever because this stuff is so important and so geeky, but
I love it. Thank you for giving a shit about boundaries, my friend.
All right, we'll see you later.
Indeed. Bye.
And unity, that whole concept of unity really does, at its core, it says that folks have to conform to be together.
Right.
And when I'm in solidarity with you, I don't necessarily have to agree with everything you do. Right? But I know we're going the same way, right? Like we're trying to make that same outcome, right? But it is not the sense that you and I have to be you. Like I have to literally fit in to be accepted.
Yeah. So the distinction I'm hearing is unity requires conformity, solidarity does not.
No, from my perspective, it does not require conformity. And solidarity is a way to show up so this unity tries to give you this undivided entity, which we know isn't true and doesn't happen.
Right.
So, and solidarity, I don't have to be you to understand your humanity.
Yes.
I don't have to have your lived experience to know that you deserve health care. I don't have to be a woman in a wheelchair to know that that woman in a wheelchair deserves all of these things simply because she's human.
Yeah.